So Keith, We Are Scientists has some exciting stuff going on. New album out October 8th. Before we get there, you guys have a new single, Contact High. And I thought a nice place to start to talk about would be the video. The video is really cool, and it almost has like this high budget, low budget feel to it at the same time somehow. I mean, it looks very real, but it looks like you had to actually go to these places like Miami or did a lot of trickery. Could you just kind of talk a little bit about the process of making it?
Yeah, it's got sort of that Robert Rodriguez El Mariachi vibe, where you can tell it was done on essentially $0, but the most was made out of quite little. And hopefully, like Robert Rodriguez, we will be some of the biggest directors in Hollywood in 10 years' time.
Did you guys come up with the concept, on your own, or did you work with some other folks, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it was essentially a production based between solely Chris and I. We had a little help filming, but the essence of the idea, I think, started because I've been down in Miami for the past 9 months now. My whole family lives down here, and so while I was not touring and no longer in a studio, I figured I'd come down and be closer to my family. And also, to be honest, it was in the dead of winter, and it seemed nicer to be down in Miami than in New York City in January.
So for those that haven't seen it, they should check it out. Sorry for interrupting you there. So it's not often we see kind of guerrilla music videos where there's footage on a plane and in an airport. And watching that was kind of like, it was cool to watch it, and I almost was worried you guys were going to get in some sort of trouble. And then with the mask on in the plane, it felt even more real. What was that process like? Were there any issues with security or having to talk your way out of things or anything?
There were not. I mean, a lot of the airport sequences inside were filmed at Fort Lauderdale International Airport, which was eerily quiet. We filmed some also at Miami International, which is just a much busier, hub for Florida. So that was all like filmed outside and stuff. But yeah, inside Fort Lauderdale International was eerily quiet. So yeah, we really had. I don't think we had any issues filming at all. At one point, when we were filming on the lake that sort of appears midway through, we were alerted that somebody was nervous about two guys in suits passing a suitcase back and forth in the middle of the lake, but no police intervention occurred or anything like that.
So as far as that suitcase, it's as you're watching the video, you kind of feel like, all right, eventually the end of the video is going to come. Someone's going to open it up, and there's going to be some gag, and we're going to know what was in that suitcase. But then that doesn't happen. So that opens the door to continue with this kind of device. Are you guys planning on keeping the suitcase thing going, in other videos?
I wouldn't say we've ironed it out yet. We're definitely intending to exploit the MacGuffin of the suitcase a little further. I mean, we don't really want to pound it into the ground. There obviously is something much more intriguing the less you belabor the mystery of the suitcase point. For a while we were talking about what could be in the suitcase and whether or not we wanted to discuss that, but then we got more interested in sort of the recursive loop of the video. That seemed more weird and interesting to us than worrying about what's in the suitcase.
So the single is out, let's say, July, August, September, about 3 months before the album release. So it seems to be, when you guys were on a major label too, everything was kind of, this is when you put your first single out, this is when you do your second single, so on and so forth. Now, bands could put out 10 singles, they could put out one, they could do a video for every track, they could do none. So with all of that freedom, how did you decide to put the single out now?
Well, we sort of want it's been a while since we put a full album out. We put out a few singles in the past year. We put out 2 different songs, but it's been a pretty long time since Fault Lines, which was the last single. I don't even remember when we put that out. But we didn't want to wait any longer to have some music. It seemed like 3 or 4 months was a good time to start discussing the album. I mean, we're probably going to trickle some more music out before the album drops. So it's not as if we're going to do one song and then wait, a quarter of a year before something else comes out.
One question that wasn't asked a lot before the lockdown was, did you guys record this album together? Were you in separate parts of the country? When did you do it? So what was kind of the timing and logistics of making this record?
Yeah, in terms of making the record, COVID lockdown actually worked out pretty well for us. We were in a studio in Midtown Manhattan that we had fortunately decided we were going to produce this record ourselves. We've just gotten our demos have gotten more and more involved over the years. And we finally were like, it would be interesting to see what happens if we are just really hard on ourselves and try to produce it ourselves. So we had rented out this studio from a friend. And so fortunately, we were on nobody else's timeline. And we'd been going in for maybe 3 weeks at that point I think we'd rented 6 total weeks before lockdown occurred. And the guy who owned the studio was trapped out of the country. And he was like, you might as well just keep going in and using it. I can't use it. So we ended up having a lot of time in the studio and ended up recording a lot more music than we would have. But we did get a lot of time together working in the studio. And then we finally left that studio and began working at home sort of independently. But we're sending stuff to one another back and forth. But that was a perfect situation because all the essential ideas came together while we were in a room. And then we could each sort of go away and mess around with stuff without feeling the need to, come up with something immediate because both of us were sitting there waiting. So it's sort of the best of both worlds in terms of our studio use.
Besides you and Chris, is there anyone else playing on it?
Yeah, so Keith Karn, our drummer, plays all the drums on it. And we sort of had a fun experience with him where he played all of his basic drums as, sort of they had been written, but because we had all this time in the studio, we would also just be like, now do, 6 takes of really weird stuff that, we can immediately delete if we want, or we can mess around with it later. And we ended up, every once in a while incorporating something very strange in the context of a more straightforward drum part that just made everything more interesting.
How would you kind of describe the album very broadly, either sonically or thematically?
It's funny because I think most people think of us because of sort of the nature of our first record and because of our live shows as just like a very energetic, kind of straight rock band, like very enthusiastic and danceable. And I think this record, more than our past few records, kind of leans into that vibe a little more, which is funny because, we spent the most time in the studio on it, which I think often in sort of the, too much time in the studio cliche can often lead to an overthought record or, a record that doesn't feel very live. But even though there's a lot going on the record, I think it's like a much more interestingly arranged record to us. But the core of it, I think, feels a little more rambunctious than we sometimes can sound on record. I think because we were the ones recording it, we weren't very interested in getting perfect takes out of ourselves, or I think we were also less stressed out because there wasn't a producer sitting watching us, track our takes and feeling like, oh man, I just got to get this right so this poor guy can go home for the night.
Right.
We sort of never. It's very nice to not have that. Pressure is the wrong word, but sort of like sense of responsibility for someone else's well-being in the middle of making a record, which was sort of part of why we were interested in producing it ourselves. Is that it's sort of nice to be able to go into a studio and know I'm only wasting my own time or Chris's time if in that entire day nothing good comes out of the day. And so I think you end up having a little more fun while you're recording because you don't really care if this take is the take that you use. So I think there's usually a little more energy in those takes. So that was a pretty good lesson to learn, I think.
You talk about the immediacy, rambunctiousness of the live show, and you're going to be able to actually do that in a little more than a month. So
yeah,
August 10th at Elsewhere Rooftop in Brooklyn. So homecoming show, kind of a welcome back to touring show. So have you been thinking about that? Are you kind of like raring to go?
It's funny. It's still like doesn't really quite feel like it's real to me. Especially since we've been working on these songs, all I've been thinking about is how much fun it will be to play them live. So I think the fact that I've been mentally preparing for shows for a year and a half now makes it seem insane that that a show is coming up. But yeah, I'm in Miami right now, but I'm heading back to New York shortly to start rehearsing for these, which is like even just being in a room playing with those two dudes is pretty exciting.
When and where was the last show you guys played?
Our last show was in London at a venue called the Roundhouse in December 2019.
Wow.
It was we did a 50th anniversary tour of our first record, which we sort of were on the fence about doing like a Love and Squalor centric show, because we thought at that point that our next record was going to come out the next year. We're kind of like, we don't really know if we want to do a tour right now because we'd rather be working on this record. In retrospect, I'm so glad that we did that tour, because our last tour would have been in like 2018 if we hadn't done that tour. And that tour was also a lot of fun. So I was glad we had done it anyway. But like now, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm so thankful that we had that sort of random tour at the end of 2019.
In that kind of time period of when the tour starts and until the record comes out, are you planning on playing a lot of the new record? Do you plan on playing more of it when it's out there and people could kind of come to the show with it kind of embedded a little bit in their brains and being able to sing along and things like that?
Yeah. I mean, especially now that this is our 7th record, sort of balancing set list is more and more precarious. So, there are only so many new songs we can put into a set anyway. But yeah, part of the conversation that we had specifically regarding the British tour that we're doing in November was that we wanted that to happen well after the album had come out, so that people would know the songs. At one point, our booking agent thought it would be cool to like start the tour and then have the album come out like midway through, so the tour was sort of a celebration of the release, which I agree with in many ways. But I think ultimately, I always like going to a show where I know the songs bands are playing. So to me, it just always makes more sense to let people know what they're going to be seeing before they're forced to digest it in a club.
Going back to the early days, you guys almost, as far as, a lot of bands, they start off at the indie level and then get signed and then the way things go now. Then they go back to the indie level. Usually, not many bands stay on a major, especially rock bands. But you guys, your first full length, your first two, major records came out on, very major labels. So
Yeah.
what was it like, first of all, getting signed in the process? I mean, what was it kind of the goal, or was it something you went into with a little bit of trepidation? Or
It I mean, we definitely always wanted to make records that people would be able to hear. I don't think we ever necessarily cared about it being on a major label. Especially being in New York City at that point, and like sort of our favorite bands at the time being bands like, Pavement and Dismemberment Plan, and sort of more independent bands like that. The benefits of being on a major label were apparent to us, but I don't think we ever had the sense that that was sort of a definition of success by any stretch of the imagination. It just turned out that the way our career sort of started building, it just made sense. And a lot of the people that were most interested ended up being a bunch of major labels. I think just because of what music was blowing up right around then. I think major labels were like, oh, this is a band we could, have an easier time than we normally would getting radio play and getting on big tours. So it seemed like the timing was good for us being on a major label at that point. I don't think even 3 years earlier or 3 years after, it would have made the same sense that it did when we signed.
There was a period, I don't know, I guess maybe it was kind of early to mid 2000s, where it seemed kind of crazy to put on MTV and you'd see, people playing guitars, and it was whether it was a lot of it seemed like New York and London were the two main points, and we could run through all the bands, but whether it was Interpol or the Strokes or Block Party and Franz Ferdinand, who I don't think are from London, I think they're from Scotland. But was there kind of the last time I remember seeing anything where it was like a chunk of bands kind of in the same genre all at once was kind of like the grunge thing, and this was like at least 10 years
right
ago. Was there a sense of like a movement or a genre or a scene or anything, or are you just guys in a band that wrote songs and got signed and
it's sort of hard for me to say. We were a little bit after the real height of the New York scene. I think we sort of came between waves of the New York scene. I think there was like the Strokes, Interpol, Yes thing, and then about 4 years later, the MGMT Vampire Weekend kind of thing. Although my sense of that second wave was that was not a scene in any way. I don't think any of those bands really came up together. And we knew a lot of the people in sort of that first wave of New York scene, but I never really got the sense that they were all that integrated. I mean, obviously, like Yes and Liars kind of were brother and sister bands, but I think press needs a PR angle, and I think scenes make press very exciting, which is cool. I like it, and to be fair, New York itself was just in a very exciting phase, and there were a billion bands sort of blowing up at the same time. So I do feel very fortunate that we were living in New York, in 2001 and 2002. Sort of made us very excited to be in a band, and sort of made the bar seem very high, made us really work much harder than I think we would have if there weren't so many of the best bands in the world living down the block from us, literally.
It seems like the downtown Manhattan thing kind of, for whatever reason, a lot of the focus kind of went over to Brooklyn for a while, maybe, or maybe both, and then now I don't know if there's any focus. It's hard to tell. I mean, when I talk to some people and I ask them to describe, well, what's the New York rock scene like now? And they say, well, there isn't one. And, how do you feel about someone that came through it and saw the benefits of it?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of go back to my assertion earlier that there wasn't the sort of scene that was built up, and obviously I won't be part of the scene in Ridgewood, Queens right now of 20-year-olds playing tiny, underground clubs. I will say that there did seem like there was if not a scene, there was a clear ecosystem in New York going on. And like club promoters, up and coming club promoters were hustling to open all these new cool venues that then became legitimate giant New York venues, despite having literally been built in the person's illegal apartment in a warehouse. Feel like that's happening now. It will be interesting now that the real estate market in New York City has sort of been at least paused or slightly reset by COVID and a lot of people just leaving the city who could afford to. It will be interesting to see how cheaper rents and less insanely fruitful building development,
Right.
How that will change things, because I think that was part of why New York scene at least seems to have slowed down, is that people couldn't live in these smaller hubs anymore. It's crazy to think that 20 years ago, Williamsburg, which is one subway stop away from the East Village in Manhattan, was considered a place you wouldn't live because it was too far away.
Right.
It's literally a 4-minute train ride under the river. Now to find cheap rent, you have to go 45 minutes out on the L train, or deep South Brooklyn, or move to Queens, or up in the Bronx. Or so I think that's part of what is stopping things from feeling quite so cohesive or centralized, especially for me, who lives in essentially in Williamsburg, where it's me and a bunch of bankers living there. So it's not like I'm seeing all these 20-year-old bands hanging out. They've got to live 40 minutes out.
40 minutes out, or New Jersey or something. And
exactly.
It's interesting too, because when you look at the history of any kind of, whether you call it a scene or ecosystem, like you said, it's one of the things that an artist colony or anything starts because you could get a loft apartment. Even in the 70s, I'm reading a book now, The Bronx is Burning, about 1977, and people were living in these illegal loft apartments and putting on shows, and paying $200 a month. And it seems like Manhattan is so, even if you had some weird walk-up apartment, it's probably controlled by some conglomerate, and you're not going to get away with any of that, and your rent's going to be sky high. And I look at Philadelphia, which isn't cheap, but comparatively it is. And I have friends that are living, 3 guys living in a nice big house, working at coffee shops or whatever, putting out albums. It just seems like if that's going to happen here, it's not going to be anywhere we heard of.
Right.
And when you move to somewhere because it's cheaper, if enough people move there and it becomes cool, then it's the reason you move there isn't the thing.
I mean, it's sort of a precarious balance, because you want there to be enough people to sustain that ecosystem, but then once it becomes cool, that the ecosystem gets toppled. I mean, we played one of the earliest shows at a venue in Williamsburg that the record store Rough Trade had opened, and upstairs, this was maybe 8 years ago, I guess, I don't know, and upstairs from it were a bunch of condos, and after our show, the venue was shut down for 3 months because the condos upstairs all complained about the volume. So they had to rethink the soundproofing of the venue and stuff like that. It's not even about whether it's cheap enough to live there. It's what's your ability to play music in that area.
And if you do it well enough and it becomes beloved enough, so many people are going to come in there that it might prohibit you from being able to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't, another thing about Rough Trade, the fact that they're in Midtown now, I don't even know if that's what that means. I don't understand.
Yeah. Great. It's a great record store.
Yeah, yeah, and we don't have a lot. We don't have many left.
No.
You mentioned the UK briefly, and the UK really seemed to embrace We Are Scientists. Early on, you guys tour and tour and tour. A lot of good press over there and things like that. The record charted, I think, right out of the box there. Well, why do you think the UK has been such a great place for you guys?
I mean, sort of going back to what I was saying before about just the timing kind of being right for a band like us. In the UK, especially, their national radio stations were just playing our genre of music incessantly, even much more than the major radio stations in the US were. Like even at the height of the Strokes, you weren't really hearing the Strokes on saturating playlists on the radio, whereas in the UK they were definitely on BBC One every half hour. They probably played a Strokes song. So I think we just slotted in very well with the genre that they considered acceptable to play, and we were a very good version of it, so we got a lot of play of that. But yeah, I mean, I think as with all things, timing was really the essence of it. Like I think we could have been the exact same band. We were at that point, but if it had been 2 years earlier or 2 years later, it just would not have happened that way.
Are there things that experiences you had during that major label period that you were able to learn from, whether they were positive or negative? Are there things you've been able to apply to your career now, even though you're not, working with a major?
I think we sort of had an interesting experience on a major label because we were signed in the US, but we did our best in the UK. So we were sort of treated as a satellite band, and the people that signed us in the US didn't really have all that much to do with our career. So we sort of got to do really whatever we wanted. We kind of operated like we were on an indie label, because all of the ideas that we implemented were our ideas. Like we never had that experience that you hear from people that will complain about being on a major label, about sort of being told what to do and like what to wear, things like that. We always made all of our music videos with personal friends of ours. They were always our ideas. We made our records with the same producer for the first 3 records, who was a nobody when we made the first record. So we sort of felt in a lot of ways like an independent band. We just had a good promotional budget that we got to use, and they let us do very weird things with our promotional budget. So we didn't really have a lot of complaints. I mean, our biggest problem with the major label system is that it tends to turn over its employees pretty quickly. So within 4 years of us being on Virgin and EMI, pretty much none of the same people were working there. So that was a big part of why we didn't renew that contract, is like the presidents were all different, and the people we worked with on a day-to-day level were different. And it seemed like a situation in which we could very, very easily just get essentially not shelved, but ignored, and then not get any money to do all the weird, stupid things we would want to do.
Right.
So we sort of felt like it was probably better at that point to go somewhere where we knew people that would work with us would be around.
You guys, we started off talking about the new video, and you've really, embraced video with each album. And you could tell by watching them that it wasn't just sometimes you could watch a video and realize the band didn't really want to do it, especially
Right.
in the 80s and 90s. They just kind of, but you guys have embraced, that format. Why? And also, did you kind of grow up, I'm thinking about, were you growing up in the heart of the MTV time when videos were, a huge deal?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did grow up in that era. I mean, I, I think our the enthusiasm that we generally bring to videos kind of comes from our sense that it would be a waste to not try to make something not as good as possible, but just as interesting as possible. Like I think for better or worse, our approach to things is often to ask what would a weird thing to do be, rather than necessarily what would a good thing to do be. So yeah, I think our interest often comes most in like either trying to subvert the thing we're doing, whether it's a press release or a music video or band photos or things like that. I think we're part of it comes from us just often being embarrassed when we see people we know trying to look very cool doing stuff. And even though I think in the grand scheme of things, that is probably a good approach to take, is to like make people think you're cool and like want credit you with that. But it always kind of embarrasses me to see other people do. So I never feel good. I never feel good when I look at something that we've done. I'm like, oh, does that look like we think we're cool? Because I know if I saw someone else do this thing, I would hate them for it. That I think that keeps us trying to make things that people will say, that's a strange choice to have made, and now I'm interested in what these guys are thinking.
Right.
So let me look at the other things they're up to. Right. I think that's sort of I think that's why we have sort of a reputation as a personality band. And I think that's why people sometimes think that we're like a jokestery band. I don't even think we do make a lot of jokes, but we also do things that make people say like, I can't tell if this is a joke or like, why would they do that? Right. That to me is very interesting. And I think also I think a lot of bands do try to do that, but you can see that what they want is for it to be off-putting or confusing. We want everything to be appealing. Mm-hmm. We just want it to also be confusing.
Right. So like a lot of bands, you used, lockdown. One way you stayed engaged with your fans is through the live streams. And you guys kind of took a little bit of a different approach to that. So talk a little bit about that.
Again, far be it from me to say that, answering fan questions and then playing a couple of acoustic songs is a bad way to do a live stream. But it just seemed like that would be, for us, that would be a fairly lost opportunity to do something interesting with the format. So our approach to it has sort of evolved into us using it as a phone call between Chris and I, and sort of us catching up with one another because we were incapable of personally hanging out. And then it would always devolve into some sort of surreal, often joke-based back and forth. But yeah, I became very thankful that he and I were not simply in the same room. When we started doing live streams, we were still in the studio, and we would do them sort of the two of us sitting next to one another facing the camera. And we would still do jokes and stuff, but it earned more of a voice for me once it became a private conversation between Chris and I that hundreds of other people could then just watch turn into a bizarre, surreal, comedy show.
When you do something like that, I don't know if this is something you've thought about, but when you think just as a fan, if there was a band that you could watch them doing that, who would that be?
I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like a lot of bands are very thoughtful about it. There was a band in New York. They've since broken up, so they're probably a bad answer. But they were called Oxford Collapse.
Oh yeah.
And they were on Sub Pop for 2 or 3 records, I think, and they were one of our favorite bands in New York City. They were definitely part of our scene, but they were definitely some of the funniest guys that we knew in the industry. I would watch them do a live stream any day.
So we talked about the record, Huffy, out October 8th. The new singles, Contact High. The immediate show is at Elsewhere Rooftop, August 10th. Anything else I didn't bring up that you wanted to mention?
Oh, I'm sure there is, and my management will probably be very mad at me for not having an immediate answer to that. I'm not sure. Yeah, album out the 8th, Elsewhere, August 10th, tour coming up. I guess that's got to be it, right?
I guess you'll find out.
Yeah, I don't know.
That seems like a lot. All right, well, Keith, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and
yeah, thanks.
yeah, I'm really excited to hear the new record too. So
I'm excited for it to be heard.
all right, take care. Thanks again.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.